The creature arrived in chains of light, held inside a hexagonal cell, no wider than a bedroom and no taller than grief. Glass walls shimmered with containment fields, rippling like oil, humming with an unseen violence. She, such a term applied to a being with skin that flowed like dusk and eyes like frozen stars crouched in the corner, unmoving, unblinking, a mystery no one dared name. The soldiers wouldn't speak near her. The scientists logged their findings from the far side of the observation wall, where data felt safer than presence. Rumors spread like wildfire in the steel corridors of the Deep Earth Research Complex. She had killed 10 men on the outpost moon without lifting a weapon. Others said she simply appeared, and their minds tore themselves apart trying to understand what they saw. No one knew where she came from, only that she fell from a silent, broken vessel that drifted into human territory, bleeding radiation. And silence. Some said her kind was a warning. Others whispered about ancient war beasts or forgotten empires. But no one went near her. No one until a technician named Elias came on the night shift, humming under his breath with a thermos of coffee, and grief stitched into the corners of his eyes. He wasn't cleared for interaction. He was only there to log vitals and inspect system redundancies. But on that cold Tuesday evening, while storms raged in the upper layers of Earth's crust and seismic vents howled in the distance, Elias looked up from his console and saw her looking back at him, not with rage, not with madness, but with something like sorrow. Her long limbs trembled, folded like a bird trying to disappear into its feathers. No data logs captured it. No alarm. Triggered. Just two souls adrift in the artificial glow of containment, bound not by wires or commands, but by the deep, sudden gravity of mutual isolation. And in that moment, when time slowed to the rhythm of shared breath through glass, Elias did something. None of the others dared. He did not flinch. He did not run. He simply whispered through the mic, barely audible through static, "You look tired." And the alien, this silent terror from another star, blinked slowly and exhaled. The next night Elias returned, though he told himself he wouldn't. He sat in the surveillance room longer than necessary, eyes lingering too long on her cell, fingers tapping the console with a kind of restless guilt. He told himself it wasn't connection, it wasn't empathy. It was curiosity, that ancient ache inside humans to understand what others feared. But that was a lie, and he knew it. When the chamber lights dimmed to their nighttime cycle, casting the entire wing in pale blue like a memory of the ocean, Elias slipped into the observation room again. He brought nothing but his thermos and a silent promise not to speak. But when he saw her again, knees tucked beneath her strange and elegant frame, face half buried in her folded arms like a child trying to disappear, something unspoken cracked inside him. She didn't move when he entered, but he felt her watching always. Watching from the corner of her vision, her eyes pools of restrained pain. "Still tired?" he asked softly, ignoring the protocol screaming in his head. The air around her shimmered in soft pulses, a sign the containment field was still solid, safe. But her presence wasn't what frightened Elias. It was how familiar she felt, like an echo of sorrow he'd buried long ago. "I know the feeling," he continued, unsure why. "My brother, he used to look like that near the end, after the meds stopped working. After the wart chewed through his bones." The alien's head tilted slowly, barely perceptible, but it was the first movement she'd made in 2 days. It was as though the sound of vulnerability unlocked something, a code she recognized, even if she didn't understand the words. Elias stayed longer than he should have, told her things he never told his therapist, about how he signed up to work in the depths because he didn't want the sun anymore, about how he watched too many people break in silence and never learned how to scream. She didn't respond, not with words or signs. But something in the air changed. The hum of the containment field dimmed to a softer frequency, and for a second, her body stopped trembling. The next night, he brought music. Old songs his mother used to play when the world felt too sharp, piano ballads that wrapped around pain like a warm blanket. He sat outside her cage and played them low on his tablet, careful not to trigger the AI monitors. As the notes drifted through the air, something extraordinary happened. She moved. She sat up, straightened her long back, and reached one hand forward, not to touch the glass, not to escape, but simply to listen, as if the notes weren't sound, but language, and she had just remembered how to speak. Her hand hovered in the air, fingers long and elegant, twitching in sync with the melody. Elias watched in awe, eyes burning with quiet joy. "You feel it, don't you?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. "Music, it's what saved me, when nothing else made sense." He left that night with something strange in his chest. Not hope, he wasn't that foolish, But possibility. Then came the whispers. The senior staff noticed anomalies in her behavior. Lowered stress indicators. Neural patterns resembling REM sleep, something they didn't think her kind experienced. They credited environmental factors, isolation adjustment. But Elias knew better. He said nothing. He just kept coming, night after night, his words growing bolder, his presence steadier. And she kept listening, watching, learning. On the 12th night, as the rain hammered the facility dome and thunder boomed across the dark horizon, Elias arrived with a gift, a book, real paper, old and worn, passed down from his father. He pressed it against the glass and showed her the illustrations, drawings of stars, of constellations from Earth's many myths. "We used to think everything out there was a god or a monster," he said, eyes scanning her reaction. "Turns out we were half right." And for the first time, something beyond recognition flickered in her expression. A shift in the curve of her brow, a softening of her gaze. She wasn't just a specimen. She wasn't just a warning. She was someone, and Elias, against all rules, against every inch of protocol and fear, had begun to see her not as an alien, but as a soul in a cage, much like his own. Asterisk, asterisk. The days grew colder in the subterranean halls of the facility, though temperature regulation never changed. It was something deeper, something in the bones of the place, as if the earth itself held its breath. But Elias didn't notice the chill anymore. He lived for the silence between moments, the fragile quiet that bloomed in the presence of the alien, who now sat upright when he entered, whose eyes followed him with quiet purpose, whose gestures began to mirror his own in small, haunting ways. They had built something wordless in those evenings, something precious. He brought her simple things, a strand of silver wire he bent into star shapes, a soft scarf he pressed against the glass so she could see the pattern, old books filled with watercolor skies. In return, she gave him nothing material, but what she offered was more sacred than any gift. There were times now, brief and fleeting, where her eyes closed as he spoke, as if she was resting for the first time in years. He began reading aloud to her, not data or reports, but poetry. Human poems, aching and sharp, filled with longing, and joy and loss. And she listened, still as frost. He began to call her Solace. He never told the staff. The name was his, a secret wrapped in meaning. She never responded, but on the night he first whispered it, she had placed her hand long, fingers and strange translucent skin against the barrier between them, and left it there for the duration of the poem. He had wept silently that night, for her, for himself, for the unbearable beauty of finding someone who understood pain without a shared language. He learned her rhythms, her silences, the way she looked toward the corner whenever he said the word family, the way her shoulders tensed whenever alarms echoed down the halls. She hated the noise. It made her retreat again, curling in on herself like a wounded creature. So Elias began playing white noise during those times, soft rain, gentle wind, forest sounds. Slowly, those storms inside her faded, and then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, as he was cleaning the console, he heard a sound faint, irregular, like breath, but not. He turned, expecting machinery. But it came from her, from Solace. She was watching him, eyes brighter than he had ever seen, her chest rising and falling not with breath, but with intention. Then it came again, a sound halfway between a hum and a whisper. It wasn't human, but it was music. She was mimicking the melodies he'd played. She was singing. Elias froze, throat tight with wonder. He stepped closer to the glass, barely breathing. "Is that for me?" he asked, voice hoarse. She didn't answer, not in words. But the song changed. It grew softer, warmer, with a rhythm that mirrored the lullabies he used to hum to his brother. In the hospital when the pain got bad, he leaned his forehead against the glass, overwhelmed, shaken to his soul. "You remember," he whispered, closing his eyes. "You remember what matters." From that day forward, everything shifted. She began responding to his gestures, mimicking hand waves and small bows. One evening, when he tapped 3 times against the glass, she tapped 3 times back. They invented a language, crude but real, built of sound and silence, of patterns and memory. He taught her the word safe, showing her with drawings, with gestures, with a hand against his chest. And every time he left now, she would tap 3 times on the glass, her way of asking if he'd return. He always did, but not everyone remained. Blind to their connection, cameras picked up anomalies. The AI noted the behavioral changes. Whispers began again, this time tinged with suspicion. The staff grew tense. Elias received a quiet warning from his supervisor. No unauthorized interactions with the specimen. He nodded, played dumb. But in his heart, he knew the clock was ticking. Still, every night he came back. Still, she waited. One night, as the systems dimmed to sleep mode and the halls grew silent, Solace reached out again. Her hand hovered against the glass, trembling not with fear this time, but with longing. Elias pressed his palm against hers, the barrier humming between them. "You're not alone anymore," he said, voice breaking. "Not while I'm here." And though they could not touch, though galaxies of biology and history and fear separated them, in that moment, two souls found each other across the void. Not man and alien, not captor and prisoner, but companions. Asterisk, asterisk. The alarms came without warning, red spirals of light slicing through the sterile air, sirens screaming down the reinforced corridors like the howl of a dying god. Elias dropped his tablet as the floor trembled beneath his boots, monitors flickering erratically, the comforting hum of containment fields turning jagged and sharp like shattered glass. He ran, not toward the exits like others did, not toward the safety protocols drilled into every employee since day one, but straight toward the isolation wing. Toward her, toward Solace. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. Whatever the danger was, he couldn't let it reach her. He couldn't bear the thought of her frightened and alone in that cage again, trapped in a place that never asked who she was before deciding what she must be. But when he reached the hall, it was already too late for ignorance. A new figure stood outside her containment room, tall, in military armor darker than space, flanked by two armed guards whose rifles hummed with energy. The sigil on their shoulders wasn't from the science division. It was War Command, black files. Need to know. Only the kind of people who made decisions behind closed doors and never looked back. The kind of people who erased things. Solace was curled in the far corner again, but not like before. Her body trembled with a different kind of fear, familiar. Old, like a wound torn open. Her eyes were fixed not on Elias, but on the man in armor, who stared through the glass as though she were a bomb about to detonate. Elias moved a step forward, but the officer raised a hand. "You, step away from the glass." "She's not dangerous," Elias said, voice too loud, too fast. "She hasn't hurt anyone since she arrived." She's a sleeper weapon," the officer cut in flatly. "We decrypted partial logs from her vessel. She's a construct genetically engineered, built for infiltration and psychic disruption. Her species doesn't communicate with words because they don't need to. They override thought, turn memory into illusion. Our outposts fell because of her. She didn't kill those men with claws or guns. She turned them against each other." Elias blinked, heart dropping. That's not who she is. "You've seen the scans. She hasn't used any ability since capture. She doesn't even resist, because she doesn't need to," the man said, voice colder than the air itself. "She's doing it now. Look at you, defending it." "She has a name," Elias snapped. "Her name is Solace." The officer's gaze narrowed. "That's not a name. That's a weakness." The soldiers began prepping a portable stasis unit. They were transferring her. Somewhere off the record, somewhere she'd never be seen again. Elias turned toward the glass, panic in his chest. Solace was watching him now, not with sorrow, not even with fear, but with a kind of pleading. A look that said, "Please don't let them take me back to silence." And suddenly everything made sense. Not just her silence, not just her pain. The memories she flinched from. The way she mimicked comfort instead of asking for it. She wasn't a weapon, she was used as one. Engineered, maybe. Modified, but not born evil. No more than a gun is evil when left in a field. The war wasn't hers. It was written into her body, her mind a song she was forced to sing. But something had changed since her capture. Since Elias, she had chosen not to harm, chosen to feel, to remember music, to mimic kindness, and that choice was the difference between a monster and a person. "I won't let you take her," Elias said quietly, stepping in front of the glass. "You don't get to decide," the officer said. "No," Elias replied, more to himself than anyone. "But she does." He tapped 3 times on the glass. A long silence followed. Then Solace rose to her feet, slow and smooth, her body no longer trembling. She moved to the center of the chamber, eyes locked on Elias, and then, with the gentleness of wind through leaves, she placed her hand against the glass. The same spot as always, 3 taps, and then something rippled. Not the walls, not the field, something deeper. The lights flickered, but not from power failure. The soldiers flinched, weapons rising. But no force came, no scream, no psychic burst. Just a wave of memory pure and sharp rushing through the room. Elias was no longer standing in the containment hall. He was standing in a sunlit grove, warm wind on his face, laughter in the air, a memory, his memory, from childhood. One he'd buried long ago, the last time he saw his brother smile, a moment untainted by pain. The officer screamed, and it was gone. Elias staggered, breath ripped from his chest. The soldiers dropped to their knees. The officer clawed at his helmet, gasping like he'd seen the end of the world. Salas stood silent, and Elias finally understood. She hadn't shown him violence. She had shown him truth. She hadn't destroyed. Minds thought she had given them back to people who had lost them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The stasis unit lay shattered on the floor, its restraints twisted into useless spirals of metal. The guards had fled the wing in blind panic, their minds still echoing with glimpses of their own repressed memories, some weeping, some vomiting, none capable of coherent speech. The officer had been sedated and dragged out, eyes wide open, locked in a trance of his own childhood, mouthing the name of a woman long dead. And through it all, Salas had not moved. She stood barefoot on the cold floor of her glass prison, hands at her sides, her chest rising and falling with unnatural stillness. A storm had passed through the facility without fire, without destruction, without even a sound. And yet Elias had never seen anything more terrifying or more beautiful. He sat on the floor, his back to the wall opposite her cell, head in his hands, heart pounding. The overhead lights flickered uncertainly, a mechanical heartbeat stuttering in the quiet. What she had done wasn't an attack. Not in the way humans defined it, but it had shaken the foundation of everything they believed about her. She hadn't just revealed her abilities. She had confessed, openly, freely, and he knew now, without a doubt, that the rest of the facility wouldn't see it as a gesture of trust. They would see it as a threat. He had less than a day, maybe less than an hour, before someone higher up overrode the civilian protocols and declared her too dangerous to exist. And this time, there would be no cell. No chance for communication. Just incineration. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered, standing and pressing his forehead to the glass. They'll kill you now. You know that, don't you? She blinked slowly. The same long, liquid blink she always gave when his words didn't make sense, but there was no confusion in her gaze. Just sorrow. Deep and endless, like a sky without stars. He backed away, heart racing, brain flipping through protocols, escape routes, override codes. He couldn't protect her here, not anymore. She had shown mercy, and they would answer with destruction. It was the same old song humanity had always played: fear what you don't understand, and kill what makes you afraid. But Elias had tasted something else, in her memories, in her gift. He'd seen his brother smile again, felt sunlight on his skin, heard his own voice laughing like it once did, before grief became his only language. She had given that back to him, not stolen it, not corrupted it, returned it, asterisk, asterisk. He ran out, not away, but toward the central systems core, swiping his credentials through every locked door like a man possessed. Alarms were still active from the earlier. Psychic pulse and security teams were slow to reorganize. He had time, but not much. He burst into the command center, startling the night shift analyst who barely had time to look up before Elias was inside the override terminal. The analyst shouted something, but Elias was already deep in code forcing a bypass, redirecting control of the isolation chamber to his own console, disabling the kill command scripts buried in the stasis software. It wouldn't last long. The moment they realized what he was doing, they'd revoke access, probably arrest him. Maybe worse stop, but it didn't matter. He keyed in a new command, Emergency Evac Protocol Section G. Hidden under that script was a transport plan never meant to be used. A last resort containment release, reserved for when the facility itself was in danger of collapse. It rerouted access elevators, opened seal ground routes, and wiped logs. For 10 minutes, it was the best he could do. By the time Elias returned to the containment room, sweat slicked his face and his hands shook with adrenaline. He slammed his palm against the manual release. Alarms screamed as the containment fields powered down, one by one, their hum fading into silence. The glass shimmered, then vanished. And for the first time since she arrived, Salas stood in open air. She didn't move. You're free, Elias sighed, breathless. Go, now, before they shut everything down again. Still, she hesitated. Please, he said, stepping closer. This isn't about you anymore. It's about who we are. If we kill what we don't understand, we lose the right to call ourselves human. But if we let you go, if we choose compassion, maybe there's still a future for us. And then, for the first time, she stepped forward, not toward escape, but toward him. She placed one hand on his chest, and his mind opened not in fear, but in warmth. Memories poured into him, not his, hers, a world of light, a sky with 2 moons, a childlike version of herself running through crystal forests, a life before the war, before the programming, before she was turned into a weapon. And he understood. She had been human in all the ways that mattered, long before she met one. When the echo faded, she was already gone, vanished down the corridor, silent as moonlight. He didn't chase. He didn't call out. He just watched her go and prayed the world would not break her a second time. Asterisk, asterisk. They found him not long after, dawn guards in riot gear. The cold boots of authority thudding down steel corridors, rifles raised and safety triggers off. They expected resistance, but Elias didn't move. He stood in the now empty containment chamber. The glass walls were formed behind him, humming softly with pointless energy. His hands were raised, his eyes distant. There was no panic in his voice when he said, "She's gone." Only weariness, like a man who'd held the sky on his shoulders and finally let it fall. They shackled him quickly, too quickly, as if he might explode or vanish, and dragged him to the disciplinary wing while klaxons howled with bureaucratic fury. He was interrogated for 9 hours, straight threatened, screamed at, accused of everything from sabotage to treason. He said nothing they wanted to hear, not because he was defiant, but because he knew they wouldn't understand. She was never the weapon, he said once. Your fear was. They put him in isolation, no windows, no clocks. Just white light and cameras and a silence so thick it pressed against his chest like a second skin. And there, in that hollow place, Elias, prepared to die not by execution, but by erasure. They would redact him, bury his story under codes and false reports. The world would never know she existed, and he would vanish beside her memory like a ghost without a grave. But the world, it seemed, had different plans. 3 days later, the facility went dark down at first. They thought it was sabotage. Then the sensors failed, communications dropped, data logs corrupted. No alarms, no warning. Just quiet, and then the memories began. It started with a technician in the reactor bay, who dropped his tools and collapsed, weeping on the floor, not from pain, but from joy. He swore he'd seen his mother again, standing by a field of lavender she used to walk through before the fever took her. The guards laughed until one by one it happened to them. Old lives, forgotten voices. Lost moments returned in vivid, impossible detail. The staff panicked. They tried to reset the system. Tried to purge the feeds. But no data existed for what was happening. No source, no vector, just presence. And then they saw her. Not on cameras, not in the halls, but in their minds. Not as a ghost or vision or enemy, but as Grace. She was showing them, all of them, who they had been before fear caged them, not manipulation. Not control. Remembrance. The facility commander, a man who once prided himself on never breaking protocol, dropped to his knees in the central control room. She forgives us, he said through tears. God help us, she forgives us. Words spread fast, too fast to contain. The incident could not be redacted. Too many witnesses, too many testimonies. And the story that emerged wasn't one of war, but of awakening. Of a creature born for violence who chose peace instead. Of a man who saw her pain and called her solace. Elias was released, not because they trusted him, but because they were changed. Every person she had touched, guard, scientist, janitor now, spoke of her in reverent tones. They didn't see a monster. They saw something sacred, something fragile and luminous, something that had once been called other, but now lived in the space between every heartbeat. Still, there were those in power who called it a security breach. Still, there were those who whispered of weaponization, but their voices grew fainter because solace had left them with something stronger than fear, memory. A tide that could not be reversed. Elias stood on the surface weeks later, beneath a sky so vast it felt like it might swallow him. The first time in months he'd been allowed above ground. The air tasted like rain. The sun felt too bright. And yet he smiled, because far beyond that sky, somewhere in the shadows between stars, he knew she was watching. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a witness. And if ever the day came when humanity forgot what she had shown them, what he had risked everything to protect, she would return, not in wrath, but in truth. Asterisk, asterisk, the world did not change overnight. It never does. But something had shifted quietly, profoundly, in the weeks that followed Solace's escape. For the first time in decades, headlines across Earth and its colonies didn't scream war or scandal. Instead, they whispered questions. What defines a soul? What do we owe to those we fear? News networks dissected the leaked footage of Elias Tribunal. Philosophers argued whether Solace was the first of a new species or the last of one we had nearly destroyed. Religious leaders fell silent, some claiming she was divine, others denouncing her as false prophecy. But the people, ordinary men and women, listened. Because within them, whether they admitted it or not, something had stirred. A memory. A feeling. A quiet ache to remember who they were before the noise. Elias did not return to the facility. They offered him a position: research director, public liaison, even a comfortable retirement on Mars. He refused them all. He vanished from the spotlight, retreating to a quiet village on Earth's northern coast, where sea met stone and endless rhythm. He spent his days walking the cliffs and watching the sky, listening for the song that had once come through glass and silence. No one visited him. No one dared. Except children, sometimes, who wandered up to the old man with soft eyes and asked if the stories were true. He never answered them directly. Instead, he'd hand them pieces of paper with star maps he'd drawn by hand. Sometimes he'd hum. Sometimes, if the air was just right, he'd look up and say, "She's still out there. And she remembers. You." And then one night she came back, not in fire or shadow, not in vengeance or warning. She arrived without sound, her vessel cloaked in aurora and reflection, hovering just above the waves as the tide pulled outward like breath. Elias stood waiting as if he'd always known the moment would come. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But when she stepped onto the shore, her feet leaving no mark on the sand, he saw that she was different, taller, softer. A light pulsed faintly from beneath her skin, not power, but life. And in her hands, she held something wrapped in cloth. Small device, no bigger than a book. She pressed it into his palms. He opened it. Inside was a recording. Not of images or words, but of feelings. Moments taken from the minds of those she had touched. Soldiers, scientists, strangers, 1,000. Memories preserved not as files, but as echoes. Elias felt them all at once. The first kiss of a boy under neon city light. The laughter of a woman reuniting with her sister. The final breath of an old man who remembered how to smile before death. She had been gathering humanity, lost pieces, and now she was getting them back. Elias collapsed to his knees, tears pouring freely down his face. Not from sadness, not from joy, but from the unbearable fullness of it. He felt every wound, every kindness, every silent song. And when he looked up, she was kneeling before him, her head bowed, not in submission, but in solidarity. They sat there until dawn, when the sun rose. She stood once more and pointed to the horizon, where distant lights blinked like stars being born. A fleet, not of warships, but of vessels like hers. Carriers of memory. Keepers of peace thought they were coming, not to conquer, but to listen. Elias watched as she disappeared once more into the sky, the sea rising in her wake, and felt no sorrow, only purpose. He knew now what must be done. He would tell the world not of her powers, not of the danger she once posed, but at the moment she chose compassion over destruction. Of the time a creature built to end civilizations learned instead how to heal them. Of the night a man who had lost everything whispered, "You look tired," and changed the fate of 2 species. And so the story spread in hushed voices. In music, in memory. They called it many things: the awakening, the kindness war, the song of solace, but the truth was simple. Humanity had shown strength not in violence, but in grace, and somewhere, beyond the edge of stars, a once feared alien sang a lullaby in a language never written, made from hope and pain and everything that made us human.